Noah, we're streamlining the organization. After all these years, your role no longer aligns with where we're headed. What we need now is agility and creativity, not seasoned experience from someone your age. I sat across from them, hands resting calmly on the table. After 18 years with Euromed Solutions as the Regional Strategic Partnerships Coordinator for Asia, I knew I hadn't been invited here for a thank you. The company signed with a new language services provider. Cheaper, more efficient. The executive team's vision no longer includes employees over 50. Deborah, head of HR, said it flatly while sliding an envelope toward me without once making eye contact. Nathan Keene leaned back in his chair, offering a rehearsed smile straight from a corporate leadership handbook. I understand this might be difficult, but innovation requires change. I looked at him, calm, composed. No need to introduce myself. He hadn't bothered to remember. Are you sure you can handle things without me? We'll be fine, he said with a faint smile. I stood. Then, best of luck on Monday. The echo of leather shoes on the marble floor rang out like a scalpel tapping in an operating room. Cold, precise, not a beat wasted. The man didn't speak a word. No nod to the receptionist, no glance at security. He walked straight into the building as if headed into surgery, one only he had been briefed on. Briefcase in hand, eyes locked ahead. The posture of a man who'd already decided which tissue to cut. Nathan Keene, 36, the newly appointed CEO of Euromed Solutions. Fresh off a rising biotech firm where competence was measured by how fast you could restructure an Excel sheet, not by what actually worked in a sterile testing room. His eyes sparkled with the kind of confidence only young disruptors carry the first time they're handed a scalpel, brimming with boldness, lacking caution. I sat in my glass-walled office on the 14th floor, high enough to stay out of operational chaos, low enough to remain grounded. My position had always been the middle ground, an observation post. From here I saw everything. The rhythm of the building, the flow of its systems, and the first tremors when a stranger tried to insert himself into the company's bloodstream. Nathan didn't need to say much. Every step he took made one thing clear. I'm here to fix things. The problem was, he hadn't figured out yet what was diseased and what was vital. I'd seen 3 CEOs arrive before him, all wearing that same time-to-rebuild expression. The first was ousted after trying to overhaul the risk management model without consulting the quality control team. The second gutted HR and ended up with a class action lawsuit. The third believed he could replace the entire medical device evaluation system with AI and got the company booted from CE certification in under 2 months. Nothing surprised me anymore. The problem was never the system. The problem was always the same. Each of them believed they were smarter than the lessons this company had learned through sweat, lawsuits, and nearly 2 decades of surviving global audits. And now there was Nathan. No friendliness, no attempt to hide his contempt. To him, Euromed wasn't a living, breathing organization. It was a clinical case. And he was the surgeon sent to trim the unnecessary parts. What he didn't know yet was that the piece he considered unnecessary was the very thing keeping the entire system from falling apart. Nathan's comment spread faster than any internal memo ever had. If the FDA's the issue, maybe we're just doing it wrong. No dramatics, no emphasis, just enough to let the entire floor know he didn't care about regulations. He cared about speed. I heard the quote from a junior employee in the hallway, whispered like a ghost story told in the dark. And by that afternoon, when I stepped into the copy room, I found Mr. Denton, the QA manager, who had been here since Euromed was just a single office in Houston, crumpling an SOP checklist in his fist, muttering like a man in a trance. Doing it wrong? What, does he think ISO 13485 is some kind of marketing flyer? I didn't step in. I didn't have to. The sounds around us were already shaping a pressure in the air, like the groaning of a foundation starting to shift. Later that afternoon, Nathan appeared again, this time in the production unit. No warning, no schedule. He walked straight into the sterile engineering suite, fixed his gaze on the prototype infusion pump being tested, then turned to the systems engineer beside it. Why does it take 3 weeks to calibrate one device? I've seen other firms do it in 3 days. The engineer, a young woman named Emiko, looked at him like he'd just suggested using duct tape on a ruptured artery. Because this device is used in open-heart surgery, she said, voice trembling but steady. If the pressure deviates by even 0.1 bar, the patient could die. Nathan looked at her as if she were speaking old Japanese. Then speed up the testing. I need data sooner. She didn't answer, just looked down and continued noting results. I watched the entire exchange through internal security footage. And in that moment, a thought crossed my mind. The moment Nathan began making decisions by instinct instead of understanding, that was the moment the company's immune system started rejecting him. That night, I lay awake in my small apartment in Westwood, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the first time I ever heard the name Euromed. 18 years ago, I was a fresh linguistics graduate, brought in as a temp translator for a negotiation with a major hospital in Seoul. The original interpreter fell ill, and I stepped in. And in that meeting, I saw something most business people miss. Language isn't just a tool for communication. It's a mechanism for building trust. Just like those forms Nathan sneers at as outdated, they aren't just paperwork. They're the reason a doctor trusts a machine with someone's life. They're what makes markets like Japan or Germany nod in agreement. They're the only thing standing between his restructuring and regulatory delisting. The next morning, at the cafe in the lobby, I saw Nathan on the phone with someone. They're rigid, slow, clinging to outdated systems like they're some kind of doctrine, he said. He wasn't whispering. He didn't care who heard. He glanced at me, just once. No greeting, no pause. Just a passing scan, like mentally checking off which departments could be trimmed next. I smiled and took a sip of espresso, then typed a quiet note into my phone. Day 9. The system shows signs of adverse reaction. It's like overdosing on antibiotics. At first, they work. Then the body starts to push back. And in this case, the body was a nearly 20-year-old company with hundreds of hidden arteries Nathan had never even noticed. There were no dramatic scenes, no shouting, no doors slamming shut, just the cold ding of an HR email titled Departmental Restructuring Notice, repeating like an electronic heartbeat, hollow, indifferent. Each morning felt like a gamble. Which desk would be empty today? Which chair would be missing a coat? Coffee mugs left behind on abandoned desks stood as quiet relics, proof that someone once belonged there. I ran into Janice in the printing room. She was gathering a stack of folders, her hands trembling slightly. She used to be the one who led every internal audit with calm precision, the one who could debate an EMA inspector for hours without breaking a sweat. Now she was picking up paper clips like they were fragments of the last bit of order she could hold on to. They handed my team to some guy fresh out of Boston, she said, half laughing. He used to work in sales for sporting equipment. Does he have a biomedical degree? I asked. Janice gave a dry, bitter chuckle. He's got a degree in talking well. Then she walked away, cardboard box in hand. I didn't stop her. I didn't need to. Because in this game, silence was the only armor we had left. The Thursday meeting went on like any other. But the room felt different, like sitting in an operating theater without anesthesia. Every next slide from Nathan was a scalpel slicing through the room. He stood by the projector, laser pointer in hand, jabbing at performance charts no one had the will to read. "We're operating with too much fat," Nathan said, eyes scanning no one in particular. "Indirect costs are up 12% in just 3 quarters. We need to streamline. Fast." I glanced at Linda, the quality control manager. She didn't blink, but her hand clutched her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Any department not directly generating value needs to be reassessed." Nathan paused on a pie chart. The slice labeled Corporate Liaisons and External Comms took up 8.3%. I stared at that number like it was the countdown clock on my career. A soft sigh escaped from the end of the table, but everyone heard it. "This is a medical device company, not a software startup," Linda finally spoke. Her first words in 4 meetings. "Every process exists for a reason. You're treating us like overhead, but those processes are legal shields." Nathan turned, thin smile still intact. "I understand. But if it takes us 3 months to finalize a contract because we have to jump through 5 approval layers, then maybe the system's outdated." The room froze. Linda clutched her bag strap. I knew she had more to say, but chose to stay seated. I glanced to my right and caught John's eyes. He headed regional coordination in Europe. His expression was flat, restrained, and alert. That look you see on surgeons who already know the patient won't make it, but keep operating anyway. That afternoon, I was called in for a quick check-in with HR on Deborah, as gentle as ever, invited me to sit. On the table, a routine performance review and a list of items potentially transferable to the International Services Unit. "Noah, we're reviewing the possibility of merging your role with the Asia Coordination Team, currently managed by an external consultancy. Nothing is final yet, but..." I cut in, calmly. Not confrontational, just direct. "That team doesn't have anyone who speaks Mandarin. They've never worked with Minghua Biomed. I've sat beside them during factory inspections in Shenzhen." Deborah smiled, lightly, as if she hadn't heard a word. "Exactly. That's why we'd love for you to document your process, for a smooth handover." I stood, gave a respectful nod. "I'll send everything they'll need, and when they realize it can't be handed over, I trust they'll know how to find me." I walked out carrying nothing but one crystal-clear thought. I now had a countdown. Nathan didn't know it yet, but he'd just placed a scalpel into living tissue and skipped the anesthesia. His question wasn't meant to explore. It felt more like a quick scan, to check whether I was one of those redundant parts not yet flagged for removal. A system audit, minus the circuitry needed to understand how anything actually worked. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to be clear, precise, and right. And I was. But Nathan's eyes stayed blank, like he was trying to recall the name of an ingredient in a recipe he'd never cooked himself. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just a shrug, and that same indifferent look of someone who believed every problem could be outsourced to a consulting firm with a pitch deck. Then he turned and walked off, as if I were a speck of dust he hadn't gotten around to wiping up. I didn't stop him. I didn't explain. because I had understood something important. He didn't care what I did. He only cared where I fit, and I wasn't on his map. My name wasn't in the shiny new handbook he was using to restructure this company. That afternoon, I returned to my desk and opened my inbox. There was an email from Minghua, draft terms for the 5-year renewal, along with a note. Ms. Vaughn, we will need to clarify the procedural line items regarding EU sterilization labeling, preferably before Thursday. I read that and felt a knot in my chest, not from emotion, but from knowing there was no one else here who could answer that question fully and correctly. I typed my reply. Short, polite, slightly colder than usual. Understood. I'll prepare the outline. I recommend we keep the communication on WeConnect for now instead of internal chain. Then I hit send, like setting a timer on a silent bomb. At 5:03 p.m., I got a Slack message from Denton in QA. Heard you're getting integrated into some outsourcing project in Singapore. That true? I just replied, depends how you define integrated. 1 minute later, he sent back an emoji. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. Like two doctors looking at the same CT scan, both seeing the tumor, neither needing to point it out. On the way home, I thought back to the first time I met Mr. Liang, vice president of Minghua Biomed. I was still just a regional comms specialist for Asia Pacific. The meeting in Beijing had gone on for 6 hours, with 3 separate translation errors by the partners team. After dinner, I stayed back with him and calmly explained the difference between a framework agreement and an implied warranty clause in bilateral trade law. He nodded, poured me a cup of oolong tea, and said, "You don't just understand Chinese, you understand context." That tea changed everything. From then on, I was trusted as a senior external advisor. No memo, no applause. But every contract since had my name listed under primary liaison contact. And now Nathan, someone who didn't know and didn't care to, thought that role could be streamlined through outsourcing. That night, I got home at 7:12. I slipped off my shoes and stood silently at the door for a full minute. The apartment was quiet, same as always, but something inside me had shifted. The conference room on the 12th floor hummed with the low whisper of air conditioning and the sterile glow of white LED lights. Deborah from HR was already seated, back straight as always, her hands resting on a beige envelope without a name. But everyone knew who it was for. I stepped in, closed the door gently behind me. No rush. There's no need to hurry when you're the only person in the room who knows exactly what's really happening. Nathan arrived 3 minutes late, just long enough to appear busy, but short enough not to seem careless. He took his seat, opened a leather notebook, and looked at me like a doctor greeting a patient for a follow-up, the kind where the diagnosis had been written down a week ago. "Noah, thank you for coming," he said, voice as steady as a text-to-speech reader. "We're entering a phase of operational optimization. Some roles, including yours, will be integrated into the international services team we've just partnered with in Singapore." I tilted my head slightly, not smiling, and asked plainly, "Integrated or eliminated?" The question paused him for a second. Deborah glanced sideways but didn't interject. Nathan quickly composed himself, smoothing his tone. "We value everything you've contributed, but this is a necessary direction in our modernization efforts. The goal is to build a leaner, more agile structure." I cut in again, expression unreadable. "Are you sure you can handle Minghua Biomed without me?" Nathan chuckled, an awkward, tone-deaf attempt to ease the tension. the kind of laugh that pours salt into a wound without realizing it. We have a team, a strong team. You understand, Noah. No one is irreplaceable. It was probably a line he'd used in other meetings before. But here, with me, it landed like the drag of shears against steel. I didn't respond. I stood slowly, pushed the chair gently back into place as if I had never occupied it, then looked him in the eyes, my voice unusually calm. Good luck on Monday. Nathan blinked, maybe surprised by the composure, or maybe because he didn't quite grasp what had just been placed on the table. A farewell, a warning, or a verdict wrapped in the most civil language possible. I turned to leave, no envelope in hand, no trinkets or keepsakes, but in my mind, every step had already been scheduled, every piece of the plan aligning into place. On my way out, I stopped briefly at the front desk. Hannah, the young receptionist who used to ask how to spell Chinese guests' names correctly, looked up at me with concern. "Ms. Jess, is everything all right?" I smiled. "Just a meeting. Everything's moving according to process." And then I stepped out through the glass doors, which slid shut behind me like a quiet period at the end of a sentence. That night, I stood in my kitchen and brewed a pot of oolong tea, the one Mr. Liang had gifted me last year after our bilateral meeting in Shanghai. The box was still wrapped in its original paper, hand-lettered in soft brown ink. Respect doesn't need to be loud. I poured the hot water. The scent rose, quiet, deep, and unmistakably clear, just like the message I had left behind on the conference table. I didn't leave Euramed because I was pushed out. I left because I saw what they refused to see, a system on the brink of internal collapse, and I had no intention of being buried under its debris. 2 days after walking away, I got up at 6:05 a.m., brewed a strong pot of black tea, opened my laptop, and spent 3 hours doing one thing: compiling every strategic contact I'd built over 18 years, connections that didn't exist in any company database, insights that never made it into internal documentation. I coded them, grouped them by market, medical authority, and hospital network. At the end of the document, I typed a single line. What Euramed sees as legacy, others will recognize as leverage. I sent the file to 2 places. 1, my attorney. 2, Juliet Vaughn, partner of international relations at Lawson & Finch. Subject line, available, but only where precision matters. No resume, no portfolio, no pitch, no ask. Lawson & Finch replied in under 30 minutes. No greeting, no conditions, just a Zoom invite for 5 p.m. When the call began, Juliet didn't ask why I'd left Euramed. She simply said, "We've been hoping you'd stop playing defense." The next day, I received a keycard. Office on the 17th floor, a laptop, a list of contacts labeled Verify Relationship Integrity, and a handwritten note from Juliet. "We don't need someone who understands the system. We need someone who knows where the system breaks." No one asked me to introduce myself. No one needed a credentials rundown. Because people who've sat at real negotiating tables don't measure value in job titles. They measure it by one question. When the official channels fail, who do you call? No one's ever truly prepared for a surgery without a lead surgeon. 9 a.m. The main conference room at Euramed gleamed with glass that reflected the gray sky outside. Inside, the long table was lined with open laptops, pre-printed packets, and bottled water placed in perfect rows. Nathan sat at the head, tie a little too tight, tapping his fingers lightly on the wood as if trying to keep time with his own heartbeat. Flanking him were 2 aides, Carla from strategy, and Martin, formerly a product lead at a sporting goods company, now serving as interim external communications. I wasn't in the room, but I knew exactly what was happening. The delegation from Minghua Biomed arrived at 9:04 sharp. 3 people, led by Mr. Liang, dark suit, composed expression, the kind of calm honed over decades of international negotiation. No small talk, no polite bows, no false friendliness. They sat down like medical professionals beginning a procedure. Precise, on time, emotionless. Nathan opened with a short presentation. Not a single word in Mandarin, no interpreter, not even a thank you in their language. Just slide after slide filled with phrases like agility matrix, cost transformation, streamlined localization. I could picture the clicks of the remote echoing one after another, like surgical tools tapping on a silver tray in an OR, without a chief surgeon. 5 minutes passed. Then Mr. Liang raised his hand. "We would like to speak with Ms. Noah Vaughn." The sentence cut through the presentation like a blade severing an artery. The room froze. Carla held her breath. Martin glanced down to double-check the attendee list in his inbox, like Mr. Liang had just asked for someone who didn't exist. Nathan hesitated, then tried to keep his tone steady. "She is no longer with the company." Mr. Liang nodded slowly, his expression unchanged, but his voice dropped like a door being quietly shut. "Then I'm afraid we will not be continuing." No elaboration was needed, but Nathan tried anyway. "I can assure you, our new system is far more optimized, less dependent on individuals. The process will be automated, faster, more efficient." Mr. Liang interrupted. Not loud, not unkind. Just one line, sharp enough to tear straight through the arrogance Nathan had walked in with. "You've made a critical mistake. Remove her, and you remove us." He stood. His 2 colleagues rose with him. No further words, no handshakes, no empty promises to follow up. Just the sound of their footsteps leaving the room. Drier, heavier than the echo of Nathan's shoes that first morning he walked into this building. I was at Lawson and Finch, my new office, 6 blocks away. Morning light poured through the windows, across the desk where I was drafting a new contract. An email came through. Minghua meeting concluded. Nothing more, but I didn't need details. I already knew. They weren't coming back. And I knew that from that moment, the entire power structure Nathan had carefully constructed had begun to crack. I took a slow sip of oolong tea. No rush, no smile, no celebration. Because in surgery, you don't dance when the operation fails. You just record the cause and reduce the diagnosis to 2 words: unprepared leadership. 2 days after the Minghua fallout, my phone rang at 6:47 a.m., an hour when it's either bad news or a quiet call for help. The name on the screen was one I hadn't expected: Nathan Keene. I let it ring a little longer, then picked up. "Noah, I think we need to clarify a few things." His voice had lost its edge, no longer the tone of someone in control, just the urgency of a man starting to realize the ground beneath him was beginning to give way. I leaned against the kitchen counter, still holding the cup of tea I hadn't touched. "Clarify what? I thought I was your past." There was a pause. Then he spoke, each word like he was negotiating with himself. "No. I think we could collaborate again, just consulting, no formal title. I just need some strategic guidance, no name attached. No name?" I interrupted. No revisions to the things you said after firing me? No retraction of those vague internal reports blaming me for being rigid or resistant to change? He swallowed. Then came the line I'd heard so many times it had lost meaning. It wasn't personal. I gave a soft laugh, not bitter, just tired of the script. And neither is my answer, Nathan. I'll do it, but on my terms. On the other end, a faint exhale, like the hiss of air from a balloon that had been inflated too long. I understand, he said, much quieter now. Where would you like to meet? My office. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. I hung up before he could stretch it into something it wasn't. Because this wasn't a reconciliation. It was the first step in a procedure, with no anesthesia. When I returned to Euramed, no one waited in the lobby. No internal memo announcing the temporary strategic advisor. No warm smiles or welcoming glances. Nathan simply stepped out of a meeting room and shook my hand with unnecessary force, like he was trying to assert control with his grip alone. But his eyes had already cracked. We're glad to have you back, he said louder than necessary, making sure a few nearby staff could hear it. I didn't reply, just smiled the way someone does when they've been hired back because the company ran out of options. I didn't need a script, because now I was the one writing it. They set me up temporarily on the 10th floor, one small glass cubicle wedged between two unrelated departments. No nameplate, no title, just a laptop and a newly reactivated system login. Nathan assumed I'd start rebuilding the partnership, but the first thing I did was reopen my personal contact list. I called Mr. Liang using the private number he'd given me 3 years ago, after a long meeting in Hong Kong. Back then, he had said, "When you need a real conversation, don't email, call." It only rang twice. "Miss Vaughn," Mr. Liang said in English, his voice as calm and deliberate as ever. "To what do I owe this honor?" I didn't hesitate. I answered in Mandarin, slow and steady. "I owe you an explanation and an apology." There was a brief silence. Then his voice dropped slightly. "I'm listening." I told him everything. No embellishments, no omissions. From that ill-fated meeting to the abrupt dismissal. I made it clear I wasn't calling on behalf of Euramed. I wasn't here to justify, correct, or represent anyone. Only to let him know that what happened did not reflect the relationship we had built over more than a decade. When I finished, he asked just one question. "Where are you working now?" "Lawson and Finch, International Relations Division." I heard a faint breath. Then he chuckled, not out of politeness, but the kind of laugh that comes when you've been waiting for this moment. "Perhaps it's time we found a new partner." I replied in the same tone he once taught me, how to speak with gravity without arrogance. "You have full discretion. But if the opportunity arises, it would be my honor to work with you again." The call ended with a formal, unmistakable signal. This time, let's build it the way it should have been. Just one line. But it was the first stone, laid on a new foundation. Not to rebuild Euramed, but to create something entirely outside of it. 3 days later, I arranged a meeting between Mr. Liang and 2 executive partners at Lawson and Finch. It was discreet. No press releases, no courtesy calls to Euramed. Just 3 people in a simple conference room, holding tea instead of documents. And in Mr. Liang's eyes, I saw the same quiet nod he gave me years ago. Meanwhile, back at Euramed, Nathan was still struggling with partnership recovery reports, firing off emails urging marketing to clarify the communication gap, and trying to label the entire episode as a temporary issue in cross-cultural messaging. I didn't intervene. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. Because this time, the handshake had already happened, and not at Nathan's table. And it was worth more than any MBA he ever bragged about on LinkedIn. The first collapse always comes quietly. No warning, no fanfare. Just an email from Sahlgrenska Universitetssjukhuset, the university hospital in Gothenburg, with a subject line as concise as it was devastating. Request for contract suspension, pending governance review. Nathan didn't understand it right away. But I did. That's how European medical institutions say, "We no longer trust you." Just 1 week later, the Medica Plus chain in Ontario announced termination of their distribution contract, citing lack of adequate personnel to uphold technical commitments. Short. Director. But enough to choke a quarter's worth of revenue. Nathan's first instinct was to call an emergency meeting. The moment he opened his mouth, he met resistance. "We need to proactively regain trust," he said, clutching a coffee cup I knew had been cold since morning. Someone from the audit board, maybe Lucas, I'm not sure, spoke up. His voice was sharp and surgical. "Trust isn't software, Nathan. You can't just reboot it." No one laughed. No one bailed him out. The room went silent, like an operating theater after the oxygen's been cut. Friday afternoon, I opened my inbox. A new email from Nathan's own office. Subject: temporary suspension of all new business initiatives, effective immediately. I skimmed it. No reaction, no surprise. But I still made the call. It was brief. No formalities. No courtesy left to offer. "Noah." Nathan's voice was hoarse, like he hadn't slept. "I'm not here to offer a solution." I cut him off. "I'm here to close the loop." There was a pause. Then he exhaled hard, almost trembling. "You sabotaged me?" I let out a quiet laugh. Not cruel, just the kind you give when someone asks the most foolish question of the day. I didn't need to sabotage you. I simply reminded people of the value of respect. And you forgot that. I left Euramed at 5:48 p.m. No one stopped me. No eyes followed. No casual weekend coffee invitations like there used to be. I walked past the main corridor, where the posters once read, "We're one team." They had been taken down, leaving faint outlines of old tape still clinging to the glass. My shadow stretched along the floor, gliding past each department like a silent reminder. Not everyone who walks out is the one who failed. As the glass doors closed behind me, I didn't look back. Because you don't need to look back to know what's collapsing behind you, layer by layer, like tissue cut and left unstitched. That night, I came home, turned on the kitchen light, brewed a cup of black tea, stronger than usual, opened my laptop, skimmed a few emails. Nothing urgent, nothing unexpected. Finally, I opened the partnership tracker, scrolled to Minghua Biomed, and updated the status. Active, transferred to Lawson and Finch. As for Euramed, I left the field blank, an empty field that said more than any late apology ever could.